Hi everyone, this is Dr. Jenkins. Here we are for the lecture on general principles of nutrition. This is basically going to be an introduction to the nutrients. So later on in the semester, we're going to have a whole chapter on carbohydrates, we're going to have a whole chapter on fats and so forth. But this is kind of the intro. So we're going to introduce the nutrients, talk about them a little bit, just to get you introduced. Here's the outline. Okay, excuse me, let's just dive right in, shall we? I would certainly be remiss if, in a class called sports nutrition, we didn't define sports nutrition. It's a pretty good place to start, right? Well, let's first start with the definition of nutrient. And I'm going to put it in my own words, which I think will be helpful to you. A nutrient is a chemical compound in food that after we ingest it, performs a specific function in the body. Okay, so a nutrient is some kind of chemical compound in food that when we ingest it, it performs a specific function in the body. For example, carbohydrates, that's a nutrient. So when we ingest carbohydrates, they have a specific function in our body. Just so happens that carbohydrates help give our cells energy. Protein, that's a nutrient. When we ingest protein, it serves a function to repair and rebuild our muscles. All right? You'll notice throughout this whole course, as I'm talking, you can see that I'm underlining or starring certain things. And those are the things that you need to pay attention to. Because those are the things that will be on the exam. One of the things that I really dislike is when instructors waste students' time. I know that you're busy. I know that you have other things going on in your life. So when you tune into these videos or lectures, I want it to be worth it. And it's worth it to you because what I talk about and what I underline and star is what's going to be on the exam. This also helps because it means that you can put all of your study time towards what's on the test, as opposed to wasting time trying to figure out what's going to be on the test. So this way, all your study time can go towards what you know are the most important things. Okay, so like I said, a nutrient. Some kind of compound in a food that goes on to perform a specific function in our body. Let's next define sports nutrition. Sports nutrition is the science of or study of how these nutrients affect our body and our health. So sports nutrition is the science or study of how these nutrients affect our body and affect our health. That's what nutrition is. Nutrition, the study of how these nutrients affect our body and affect our health. So we just define nutrient. We know a nutrient is something in food that goes on to perform a function in our body. So nutrition would be the study of how that nutrient impacts our health. So for example, let me take carbohydrates because that's the example that I started with. Let's say someone chooses to drink 10 Red Bulls a day. They contain sugar, which is carbohydrate. Not that anybody would do that, right? You're never going to, please don't do that. But the nutrient is the sugar or the carbohydrates. But the nutrition of that, the nutrition of drinking 10 Red Bulls a day, looking at how those nutrients, how many you ingest, what kind you ingest, how they affect our body and our health. Drinking 10 Red Bulls a day, while we know carbs can be good to give our cells energy, too many carbs in that form can actually be bad. So that would be an example of nutrition. And then we just add the word sports in front of it. So we're talking about nutrition as it relates to activity or sports. I'm sure many of you are athletes. I'm an athlete, granted I believe a master's now, which is kind of scary. Not because I'm that good, but because of my age. So as an athlete, it's even more important that we give ourselves the proper nutrition, because not only do we need the right nutrition to get our body to work properly when we're at rest, but now we're asking our body to do all these sports and activities. So sports nutrition, the study or science of how nutrients affect our body and health as it relates to activity or sports. Excellent. Feel free to pause to take notes or whatever you have to do. Okay, so as I mentioned at the top of this video, this intro chapter is largely to introduce the nutrients. So we're going to talk about 6 nutrients. And we know what nutrients are, don't we? I can see you raising your hand. Yes, Dr. Jenkins, yes, a nutrient. It's a compound in food that has a function in the body. So we're going to talk about 6 nutrients: carbs, fat, protein, water, vitamins, and minerals. And it just so happens that these 6 nutrients are broken down into 2 categories: macronutrients and micronutrients. You might think, by looking at the prefix macro, it might be easy to think that a macronutrient is bigger in size than a micronutrient, but that is actually not the case. Instead, what we're talking about, a macronutrient, is something that we need to ingest in higher amounts. Ingest, or it must be present in our body in higher amounts. So make sure you know this definition, and then make sure you know which nutrients fall under the category of macronutrients. Carbs, fat, protein, water. They're considered macronutrients because we need to ingest them in larger amounts. And this shouldn't be surprising. Don't you need to bring in or eat a good deal of carbs each day? Sure. Which means, on the other hand, a micronutrient, which are the vitamins and minerals, these are things that we need to ingest in lower amounts, or they need to be present in our body in lower amounts. And I want to make a really important point here. It's not that the vitamins and minerals, it's not that the micronutrients are any less important. These are just as important as these. So it has nothing to do with how important they are. These are all essential. We need all of these. But it's just that we don't need as many vitamins and minerals for those vitamins and minerals to do the job that we need. It's just that we need to bring in more carbs, fat, protein, and water in order for them to do their functions. Okay, so now that we've established the 6 nutrients into the 2 categories, we're going to go one by one and talk about each one. Okay. This is just an introduction to some of the functions of the nutrients, but you really don't have to worry about it now because we're going to be talking about the functions in a few minutes anyway. And I do want to point out, when I say you don't have to worry about it, when I cross it off, or when I say you don't have to worry about it, I really mean that. Won't be on the test. In this case, we're going to cover it later anyway, and I'm going to say you have to know it, but not this slide in this way. And one last thing before we start to get into the nutrients. You're probably going to get tired of this, but I will, throughout the course, make some analogies. Hopefully, some of them work. Probably not all going to work. But sometimes I try and make an analogy to help this make more sense to you. So, in many ways, our body is made up of a lot of working parts. Our little cells, in terms of their function, our little cells are like little factories doing their job. And in order for our body cells, let's take muscle cells. in order for our muscle cells to be able to contract and create movement, they need to have the proper nutrients. And in that way, it's really no different than a car. I mean, of course, we're different from a car, I get it. But if you look at, in terms of working parts, if we want a car to be able to go, if we want a car to be able to do what it's supposed to do, we've got to give it the proper ingredients. It needs fuel, it needs gas in the tank, it needs oil in the engine, among other things. And our body is no different. If we want it to operate to its optimal level, we've got to give it the ingredients that it really needs. All right, so here we go. We're going to be talking about these 6 nutrients. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause for a moment, and then I'm going to have a next video when we begin to go through these. So this chapter is going to be several videos strung together. You can choose to look at them all at once, or you can break them up. This is part 1 over, and I'll see you right back for part 2 of this chapter.